Are your subwoofer boxes boring? Mine are. I'm in a rut. All of my enclosures look almost exactly the same. I recess the baffle, then spray paint the baffle recess, spray paint the port, and carpet the box. I like the results, but I don't like being in a rut, so I'm gonna challenge myself to try something a bit more complex. Let's find out if I can pull it off. Now, one of the problems is that I'm a DIYer like most of you, and the only way to get better is to practice and make mistakes. That takes time and money. For this project, I'm going to dig out a sub that I've had sitting on a shelf for a while. This is an NVX VCW12. It's a dual 4 ohm, 1000 watt subwoofer. And here is the first challenge that I want to overcome. Right here along the port edge. The port needs a round over to reduce chuffing, and if you make a deeper cut, the bit will leave a ridge. The technical term for that ridge is a fillet. We can then use the fillet as a guide when trimming carpet. But I also like to put big roundovers on the edge of all of my enclosures. And this 3/4 inch material is just not thick enough to put a big roundover on both sides. So here's the plan. I'm gonna build a really complicated port with a double wall along the outside. That's gonna give me room for 2 roundovers, one on each side. I've never seen this done before, so I don't know if it's a good idea. There may be a reason why we don't ever see anyone doing this. Keep watching and we'll find out together. The right-hand side of the enclosure is going to get a double wall, and I want to maintain the same port cross-section throughout the entire length of the port. So I'm going to extend these pieces here on the top and bottom the entire length of the port. It's going to create this peculiar port assembly. Kind of looks like it was designed by either a madman or a genius, or maybe a mad genius. I'm going to use a mix of plywood and MDF for this enclosure since I had some on hand. These are leftovers from other projects. And I'm gonna put everything together with glue and brad nails. I'm gonna start with the port assembly. This box is tuned to 30 Hertz, so it's gonna have a really long port that almost wraps around the entire enclosure. And I'll start by tacking the 3 port walls together. Next come the tricky part. I need to attach these pieces here. I'm not sure what to call them, so for the purposes of this video, I'm just gonna call them port shims. That turned out to be a fairly complicated process, mostly because I couldn't get brad nails into these parts right here, and I had to leave a clamp on it and set it aside to dry. While it's doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and mark the cutouts on my baffle. Instead of just a simple recess, I'm gonna attempt to add some interesting design elements with some of these templates here. For the speaker cutout itself, I'm going to plug in my router and bust out my circle jig. 2 tips I picked up over the years for using a circle jig. 1, drop a few bucks on a cord reel that you can hang from the ceiling. That makes life a whole lot easier. And 2, make your circle cutouts in multiple passes. From there, it's over to the router table where I can use the templates to cut out the port. This worked out well. The templates are 1.5 inches thick, which is the same thickness as my double wall port. After that, I trim out the design on the outer baffle and trim out the brace. And okay, I am totally stoked about how this is turning out so far. Imagine the options you have. You could stain the plywood on the inner baffle, or cover all these parts in different colored carpet or vinyl. The possibilities are endless. But before we do all that, I need to put a chamfer on the inside of the port. And here you can see one of the downsides of using plywood, it tends to chip out. A little sandpaper fixes the problem. As I start to work on the enclosure, I've found an unexpected benefit to building this complicated port assembly. It's very easy to build the box around the assembly. From this point forward, I've never had a box go together quite so easy. The downside is the port assembly itself, which took a long time to build. I probably invested as much time into building the port assembly as I would normally invest into building an entire enclosure. Instead of cutting a hole for a terminal cup, I'm just going to use these terminal studs here. I'll be sure to give you a link to them down in the video description. They're pretty easy to install. You just drill a 1/8 inch hole and thread them in. I'm going to go ahead and drill the holes now before I carpet the box. In keeping with the theme of trying new things, I'm going to use this spray gun to apply my adhesive. Typically, I just use a can of spray adhesive. I filled it up with water and tinkered with the settings before I tried it for real. The plan here is to cover this inner portion with a piece of blue vinyl, and here I am marking out the area that's going to need spray adhesive on the back of the vinyl. Then I'm going to wrap the outer baffle with this black 4-way stretch vinyl. And again, I'm marking out the areas that'll need glue. And at this point, I set the camera aside so I could focus on the project, which is unfortunate because I didn't get some footage that I really needed to show you. In this shot here, you can see that I've covered the box with carpet and I've wrapped that outer trim ring in vinyl, but I've abandoned the blue vinyl and I'm now covering the baffle with the same charcoal covered carpet. That's because I completely botched the blue vinyl. And as you can see in these shots, the black vinyl looks like absolute crap. My vinyl experiment was a complete failure. Now, this is not the ugliest box I've ever made, but it's pretty darn close. It's so ugly that I stuck this thing on a shelf and boxed up the subwoofer and set it away and never bothered installing it. But then I had an epiphany. It's okay to fail. It's part of the process. When you try new things, you're gonna make mistakes, and sometimes you're gonna look like a fool. At least until you practice it a bit. Then you start to look like an expert. If you're afraid of looking bad, you'll never try new things, and you'll never actually get good at anything. So what new thing are you going to try? Tell me about it down in the comments. Hopefully I can help you out by making some of these mistakes for you. It's always cheaper and faster to learn from somebody else's mistakes. And I couldn't afford to make these mistakes if it were not for the support of my patrons over on Patreon. So I want to say thank you to all of the guys in the Patreon gang, especially those $25 patrons: Bo, David T, Bam Bam, Dylan, Fargo, JD America, and Vava. If you want to support DIY audio content, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Check out the link below. Okay, the sub is in the box. It's time to grab the DATs and find out the tuning frequency. And we have a problem. Check out this plot. This is not right. Not only does the impedance sweep come back as nonsense, I'm getting no sound whatsoever out of the subwoofer. I even checked the coils with my multimeter and I was getting 1.7 ohm.
That was the moment he realized this subwoofer box is cursed.
You may have noticed the speaker wire when I was hooking this thing up. Both strands of the wire are blue with no stripe to indicate which side is negative. That increases the probability of making a really simple mistake like flipping the polarity. And that is exactly what I did. I flipped the polarity in between the two voice coils. So the two voice coils were working against each other. Speaker wire should come with a clear way of telling the two strands apart. Now this wire was left over from an amp install kit, and I no longer use this particular brand's install kits because they don't take the time and effort to put a white stripe down one of the wires. After taking a moment to fix that off camera, we get the cool swoop sound from the DATs, and the results look a lot different. NVX recommends a 30 to 32 hertz tuning frequency, and my own simulations in WinISD agreed with their recommendations. This box is tuned to 29 hertz. Let's get this thing in the truck and see how it performs. Right now I've got this small MVX amplifier in here. This amp needs to come out so I can put something with more power to this big subwoofer. I've been running this little amp the last week or so because of this box right here. You're gonna see it in a future video. Here is a little teaser for you. My patrons already know what I'm talking about. If you're interested in any NVX products, you can use the code DIYaudio10 for a discount at nvx.com. Through the power of editing, the JP23 is back in the truck. The sub is rated for 1,000 watts. We're wired to 2 ohms. The JP23 can probably do double that amount into a 2 ohm load. We're going to put the DD1 into real-time power mode and stick this SPL meter up on the dash, and let's try out some test tones and see what happens. Okay, y'all, that was 133.4 dB at 30 hertz. We're showing just over 1,500 watts. Now, it's hard to hit big SPL numbers at lower frequencies. So that's really a cool number. I had more power on tap, but I didn't want to cook the sub. Maybe after I've had a chance to enjoy this speaker a little bit, I'll crank it up one day and show you what it can really do. At 40 hertz, we get 133.1 dB at just over 700 watts. You can really see the impact of impedance rise in this shot. Notice we're reading close to 8 ohms. And at 50 hertz, we can really tell the impact of that low tuning frequency. We're starting to get a drop in the output. All those meters are great, but how does it sound? I am completely blown away. This thing sounds absolutely amazing. I'm kicking myself for shelving this project. This enclosure's been sitting on a shelf for months, all because I was embarrassed by the crappy job I did on the vinyl. And because of that, I lost out on several months of enjoying this really good subwoofer. I can honestly say this is the best sounding subwoofer and enclosure that I have ever built. The opening track to Techmaster PEB's album, It Came From Outer Bass, has some brutal lows. This sub in this box smashes the hell out of those lows. Big Subwoofer by Mount Westmore, absolutely brutal. And Thunderstruck by AC/DC was fantastic. It blew me away. So is that overcomplicated port design worth all the extra trouble? Probably not, especially in this case where the port had to wrap around all 3 sides of the box. In this situation, the juice was just not worth the squeeze. It might be worthwhile on a shorter port. And of course, my challenge now is to learn how to work with vinyl. In the meantime, you can click right here for another video, or you can hit the subscribe button right here, and I'll catch you on the next adventure.